All right, welcome everybody to the Sentinels of Liberty podcast. I am your host, Redbeard, and it is finally great to be back for another Saturday episode. Last Saturday wasn't feeling the best, but we're here. We're making the most of it. So today I'm going to be using some notes as I do anytime I start to deep dive or do a little bit more of a exploratory video regarding certain things. So you'll have to bear with me a little bit on that. But overall, I hope you enjoyed the episode today. So you're probably wondering, what is the episode going to be for today? Well, as you can probably tell by the title, it's Defense Delusion, lies that cripple us. And you'll start to see why it is that I kind of titled it that way. I wasn't sure if I wanted that, but, it's all the editorial woes. Any rate, let's start to jump into this. If you have any comments or anything like that, feel free to leave them below, and I will try to attend to those near the end of the episode here. But without further ado, let's jump into it. So the reason I decided to do this episode was I think in two parts, right? Essentially, I'd always felt that there was something off about this, the level of hubris, the level of just self-assurance that we've had as a country, where it's, there's this perpetual notion to where it's just like nothing can go wrong. We're the best at everything. We can't be beaten. We can't do it, anything wrong. There's no wrong that can be done. The United States supposedly is like the top tier cream of the crop. And there's no exception to this, supposedly, when you look at the military aspect of it. And Gene, I just saw you pop in. It's great to have you here, brother. I'm happy you're able to make it. So with that being said, also, as I started listening to more and more experts and people that came from the Department of Defense, the military area, and even people who are analysts or people that really took a long, deep dive into a lot of things over the last, say, 10 years, 15 years, if you will, if not more, and really started to explore some of the things they had to say, I started to see a pattern kind of build up. And that pattern became very troubling. And that is going to essentially be the conversation that we're about to have now. So without further ado, let's just jump into the meat and potatoes. The lies that kill when military leaders hide failure, erase reality, and endanger the republic. Really that initial heading for the first portion of this, or for the overall portion of this, I think really says it all, but we're going to dive a little bit deeper. So what does this mean? Well, essentially, over the probably last decade or even 2 decades, I would argue, you've heard people like Colonel Douglas McGregor, Professor Ted Postol, you have Daniel Davis, you have Andrew Cockburn, you have so many other people. And it's not just these men. There's a lot of other people that are either colleagues or adjacent to the areas that they worked in before. And they've all kind of started coming down to this conclusion, right? And I think really the best way that we can evaluate this is, it is a disturbing phenomenon. It creates a relatively unsettling pattern, and it's not one I think that's unique to the United States, but for the sake of this conversation, we're going to be looking at the United States today. Top military commanders are systematically hiding losses in war games, simulations, training exercises, and essentially rewriting failure as victory. Overwhelmingly trying to just say, no, didn't happen. It's kind of, it's funny because you have a lot of people that go after, like, say gamers, right? And as soon as a gamer doesn't get like the desired outcome, what do? Well, they hit the pause and they go back and they reload a save, and they just start from the point that they were succeeding at. And oftentimes, as gamers do, they don't start to figure out the problem until they come to the reality of, like, oh, maybe it's something I'm doing wrong, or maybe the game's actually just broken. But the point being is, you're for a society in some ways that kind of belittles gamers, which I think is kind of a funny segue, about, oh, if it was more real to life, you wouldn't have a restart. Okay, well, why are we doing that then when it comes to war games, force on force, simulation, stuff like that? How is it that these military commanders and the people that are overseeing areas of the Department of Defense, how is it that they have the ability to just go and say, you know what, hold on, we're going to go back, we're going to load the save file, we're going to redo all of this, and then we're going to get the result that we want. It's very weird. And so moving forward, I want to try and paint something here for you, kind of elaborating on that. A force-on-force exercise begins. The red team wipes out the blue team, right, in minutes. And all of a sudden, you have a general that steps in, or generals, and they say, no, that doesn't count. That one doesn't count, okay? The scenario wasn't realistic enough, or it wasn't realistic in general, so we're going to call a reset. Now, again, this kind of goes to that gamer analogy, right? So after multiple resets and they finally get a win, they chalk that up as, well, that's the official result. It certainly wasn't the 6 or 7 or 8 different failures that we had to go through along the way that we won't learn from, that will wipe under the rug, and that we'll just completely ignore over time. The only win that we get is the official result, and that's the only one we're going to report. And essentially, what this does is when a military refuses to learn from defeat, it becomes incapable of victory. So any faux victory that we might have had by doing this load save file reset type of mentality, how are you going to succeed from that if you're completely ignoring all the reasons as to why you lost? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And quite frankly, if we did that at any of our own jobs or in any other part of our life, I don't think it would work. It wouldn't pan out. Typically, that's not the way that things go. And even if you do marginally succeed, it's going to be in a very underwhelming way, to the point that where down the road, it's not going to yield anything fruitful. Overall, what we start to see too is when it erases truth, it becomes incapable of honesty. So when you start to obscure the truth and you start to do away with any of the potential failures, you do away with any of the shortcomings, which, mind you, are not a bad thing. It's a learning point, right? You start to create this realm to where you can't even be honest in an environment that I would argue begs the highest level of honesty in the end of the day. Moving ahead, when you have leaders that lie upward, governments must lie downward. So if you have leaders that lie up and up and up, then the lie has to be pushed downwards as well, creating a culture of deception that threatens ultimately liberty itself. It becomes almost second nature to these people, and they overwhelmingly just adopt this policy of the perpetual lie, and this a policy of never telling the truth or being able to admit fault. So what are the whistleblowers telling us? Well, fortunately for you, I have a couple notes here that hopefully will be able to outline this, right? So starting with, quite frankly, one of my favorite people. I think he's a very wise person. I don't always agree with him on everything, but the things I don't agree with him on are so petty. I think they can be worked out eventually. But Colonel Douglas McGregor's personal accounts of the time of when he was in and fully involved in these types of in this type of work, he recounts and has repeatedly talked about. You have senior leaders altering the outcomes of the NTC or the National Training Center exercises. You also have enemy red teams being ordered to stand down once they begin defeating U.S. forces. Scenarios rewritten mid-run to allow U.S. forces to achieve objectives. Poor performing units receiving commendable ratings to protect careers of these officers. It compounds time and time and time and again. And if you've ever followed Colonel McGregor in any of the things that he's talked about, you'll oftentimes hear him bring up the point of institutionalized self-delusion. And he has a lot of other bangers, but I do really like that one. And I thought it was noteworthy of putting down. Now, you have another individual, Professor Ted Postol, who, if you're not familiar with him, go check out some of the stuff he does. He was just on, along with McGregor, on Daniel Davis, his podcast on deep dives, or on the Daniel Davis deep dive. And I think he does a lot of good job, or a really good job of explaining things too. So what are Professor Ted Postol's findings as it pertains to missile and defense systems? Well, missile defense tests where failures were labeled partial successes. So again, you have a situation to where if you're having a missile defense test and they don't produce the result that you have command or these generals that want, or that they want, you're having them labeled partial successes. Or again, just like the force on force or the simulations, you have a situation in which they just push these under the rug, say it didn't happen, and it's not a big deal. It's reprehensible that we even are at this point where we can't even have a level of honesty, especially when it comes to missile defense. Ted Postol, as well as McGregor, have also talked about this idea of having an impenetrable anti-ballistic missile or missile defense system that, you know, will eliminate everything. And both of these gentlemen have gone on record and they've said, hey, look, there is no such thing as 100% wholly viable missile defense system. You're always going to have stuff that's going to get through, especially when you look at the shaping of the payload, and you also have other factors like distraction devices and so many other things that come into play there. You will be able to slip missiles through defense shield. You will be able to get missiles on second here. Oh, there we go. So moving on, interceptors were pre-programmed to hit non-maneuvering targets, then declared combat ready. Contractors pressuring Pentagon analysts to suppress unfavorable data. Again, the list goes on, but I think Ted Postol does a great job. Postol also brings up the system is engineered not for performance, but for the illusion of performance. So not actually getting a decent result, but in the end of the day, it has to look good. As long as it looks good and it looks like it can do something, well, then we've got, quote unquote, a viable system, which I think is the point that Postol's making, is it's really just kind of a facade. And as some people like to say, well, is it a paper tiger moment? I don't know. I'll leave that up to you guys and gals to decide, but it is a very interesting predicament that we find ourselves in. Now, moving ahead, another person that I have in my notes here that is quoted is Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, especially as it pertains to Afghanistan reports. So when we look at what Davis has talked about, he said that commanders repeatedly filed rosy assessments that contradicted the field reality. So you could have the worst case scenario on the field, but they're rewriting it for PR headlines or to look good in order to say, hey, we're actually doing really good on the field. But in the end of the day, it's absolutely just a dumpster fire, right? And unfortunately, these are mistakes that are getting people killed, or there's no real accountability of these types of things. And it's absolutely crazy how far this actually extends. After action reports, according to Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, rewritten to show progress that never existed. Furthermore, you have metrics that are changed, erased, redefined, anything to avoid admitting failure. I mean, this is a substantial, massive problem. Again, going back to that idea of if we can't even be honest with ourselves in simulation, in war games and force-on-force exercises, how are we going to be able to do this in real world? And we're seeing from the testimony of Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis that it did. These lies, they do carry over to the real world, and they obscure and they hide and they brush under the table all of the inaccuracies, willful or unwillful, depending on where you are in that system, and just saying, no, everything is perfectly fine, not a big deal. So what is the conclusion that he made about this? Well, we lied for 20 years in Afghanistan, to ourselves, to Congress, to the American people. That is what he says. And if you know anything about Daniel Davis, he is one of the OG whistleblowers back in the day when it came to fighting in the Middle East. And he's done a lot of great work since. Now, before I head on, I'm just going to take a moment here just to kind of go through some of the comments. Medi 833, really appreciate you coming in here. Really appreciate the comments. Thank you very much. And I am looking at some of your comments, and yeah, it is amazing when you step back and you look at some of the things that are going on, it's astonishing. And I try to, you made a comment about the first person I've come across that flat out mentions it. And look, I just try to really chase down certain conversations that I feel are important, not only just to liberty and the country and stuff like that. Liberty is first and foremost my primary objective. But look, if we're lying about military capabilities and we lie our way into war after war after war, and then we end up getting crushed, I mean, that also is detrimental as well, right? So there's a lot of byproducts that come from this, and each lie creates a new problem, a new threat, a new potential adversary that should never be there. And I really appreciate all of your comments. I'm trying to keep track of them, but thank you so much for commenting. Now, to move on just slightly, this is something I'm mildly familiar with. I have seen some of the background on this, and it's war games versus China. Okay, and I believe that one of the first people I ever listened to speak out about this was actually McGregor, and let me kind of go with this. So I had initially heard about the War College, and then there was one other place, I don't remember exactly where the reports came out of, but they had found that the war against China would be pretty bad. It's not this Hollywood version of, this overwhelming arc of superiority or whatever the case is. It is a lot more ugly than that. And so let's just kind of lay this out here. Multiple reports show that when the U.S. Air Force simulations faced a modern Chinese anti-access strategy, the U.S. side lost catastrophically, sometimes in hours. Senior leaders simply reran the simulation with changed rules until the U.S. won. The winning version became the official narrative briefed to Congress. And this is not the only time I've heard of something like this. There's also been conversations circling about ground fighting, the resource management, the expenditure of a very high attrition type of warfare, and how essentially within like a month and a half or 2 months, we would be out of all of our, or a majority of our stockpiles and so on and so forth. The cost of human lives would be insurmountable. I mean, there is a lot that they really do not want to tell you, which is why they run through scenario after scenario after scenario and saying, see, like, we are winning. We can win. There's not a problem. We're certainly not, going to lose this. And these are the same people, mind you, that will sit here and tell you, yeah, you know what? If nuclear Armageddon happens tomorrow, it's totally survivable in an overt way, when in reality, it's like, no, these people are absolutely off of their rockers. Now, this is not accidental, right? Don't mistake this. I mean, these are people that run these tests, and it's not just with China, it's with other situations. They run these tests, they run these simulations, the war games, force on force, etc. It's not accidental. It is a systemic, cultural, and institutional problem that we have within government and that we have within the military apparatus today. And unfortunately, what we get is the situation that ultimately trickles down, or it goes upwards first. It goes to the president, it goes to Congress, it goes to all these people, and then it trickles down, becomes an official narrative, and it becomes the main talking point that ultimately is sold to the people, right? So it's a very, very dangerous thing. You're selling a sense of confidence and a sense of capability that isn't there. You're wrapping it in a bow tie of hubris, and you're saying, this is the result. So moving forward, why does this happen, right? Well, there's a number of reasons as to why this happens. Well, the one is people who are trying to protect their careers. You have these career people. They want to go into a different path. They want to go into, a comfy little desk job or a comfy little retirement gig at places like Boeing or Raytheon or many other of General Dynamics, where they can retire, they can make a ton of money, they don't have to worry about it, and the human cost is irrelevant to them because, it's not their problem anymore. And so you end up getting full board colonels that need a perfect evaluations to make general. You have generals that make that require perfect track records to secure post-retirement defense board jobs. Again, like at the places I mentioned, nobody gets promoted for revealing the flaws, the truth. Everyone gets punished for the truth that embarrasses leadership. Furthermore, thus, it is better to hide failure than risk the empire of your own career, right? Like these men will bury you just to ensure that they get their retirement and their pension at the end of the day. They will bury, let me put it this way. These people are willing to bury this country. They will allow this country to go into a ball of atomic fire if it means that they can salvage their retirement. These are the types of people that exist within the Defense Department. These are the people that exist within government. These are the people that supposedly, and I'll even throw people like Lindsey Graham and Rick Blumenthal and so many of these other war hawks in there too. They love their retirements and they will sacrifice you, your sons and your daughters, your entire family, your neighbors, your friends, anybody that they feel that they can throw into a meat grinder just to see their ambitions, their aims fulfilled. And this idea of essentially picking the information that you want that looks good for you and looks good for your handlers or whatever the case is no exception. Moving forward, we also have issues with contractors. You have $1 trillion defense budget now, right? You have a budget that is expanded to over $1 trillion. There is no reason whatsoever that we need to be spending $1 trillion in defense spending at all. But with that, in conjunction, you have these defense firms that depend on the belief in the superiority of U.S. tech, and in doing so, these contractors also depend on a forever adversary. So whether it's the Middle East, whether it's the Russians, whether it's in Asia, whether it's in places like Venezuela, they require and they need people like Lindsey Graham out there absolutely selling you the lie that we are perpetually in danger no matter what happens, no matter, if there's even the potential for peace. Peace is not in their dictionary. They don't care about peace. They don't care about safety. They don't even care about this country. They care about getting paid and they care about peddling their goods. And when you have the military hierarchy and the government hierarchy that falls in line, you get this horrible amalgamation. Now, a war game proving a weapon underperforms threatens billions in funding. Moreover, contractors lobby Congress directly. Generals depend on them for future employment. So look, there is a symbiotic relationship here to where you pat my back, I pat your back. We have good results, you get a job. We have bad results, you're out of a job. And furthermore, failure becomes political and it becomes a political and financial liability. And just moving forward right away with the political optics of all of this, as we've been kind of going down the line, presidents and secretaries need talking points. Congress needs justification for massive budgets. You also have a situation where media loves the narratives of American dominance, which is all of these things are antithetical to the founding of our country. It's antithetical to the founding fathers' disposition, especially as it pertains to defense and foreign policy and diplomacy. The truth complicates the narrative, and nothing terrifies politicians more or like complexity, right? Complexity in the truth. This is terrifying to these people. Overall, there's also another factor in this, and I hope I'm not going too fast, but there is another factor in this. You have a cultural arrogance, right? There is an ingrained belief in the Pentagon or at the Pentagon. We cannot lose. There's no way that we can lose, right? We are the greatest fighting force ever to exist in the world, right? So you have two things. And then the third is, if we lost the war game is wrong. So think about that. You have this mantra of, or rather this gaggle of hubris, which is we can't lose. We're the best that ever existed, but at the same time, if we lose the war game, if we lose the force on force, if we lose the simulation, well, it's all wrong. It's wrong. It's not us. It's wrong because we're too good, right? There's this idea to where it's just like, oh, we're the best that ever was, but only because of the fact that we manipulate the outcome. We manipulate the projection. So it really has to, look, this is not confidence. It is a hubris thing. And the downfall of every empire in history is this centralizing of power, this hubris, this idea that you're untouchable, this idea that you can't ever be beaten. We've seen this pattern-wise, time and time and time and again. So let me posit the question to you. If we're really that good, we are really that good, we are still the top dog in the world, then why do we have to cook our simulations, our war games, force on force, our tests? Why do we have to cook this? If we're really that good, why do we have to lie about what we're capable of? Nobody wants to talk about this. Nobody wants to bring this up. And I can already hear the bleeding heart saying, oh, you're anti-American. No, I'm more American than these people are because I'm willing to recognize the problem so we can fix the problem. And with that, fix the broken foreign policy that perpetually gets us in unconstitutional, illegitimate wars, right? At what point is this sense of accountability going to start taking effect? And I hope with this upcoming generation of younger people that are anti-war, I'm hoping that we start to see some of this come back to the forefront. I really do. And look, that the generations that our children are the future. So if we have an opportunity to teach, if we have an opportunity to bring forth the truth, if we have the opportunity to be able to tell people the reality of the history and all of these different things that are taking place and get them moving in a good direction, have a good moral compass and principles, then I think we can really salvage this, but it's going to take time. I believe it was Jefferson who talked about the fact that liberty is oftentimes, almost always, matter of fact, taken in increments. It's never something that's going to happen immediately. If you do get an immediate victory, it's not a bad thing, but oftentimes that's local, right? So moving ahead, let's take a look real quickly at certain historical parallels, right? Imperial Japan's Midway war game. They did a war game. And when we look at what happened at Midway, U.S. dive bombers sank multiple Japanese carriers during their war game. The admiral overseeing the game refused to accept that. And overall, he ordered the referees to resurrect the carriers. And the scenario was rewritten until Japan won, right? So they went forward with this idea of like, oh, we're winning. We can win this. Except, again, you're loading a save file and going back to where you were doing really good. 1 month later, Japan lost those exact carriers in real life. Again, asserting the idea that it doesn't matter how bad you want an outcome. If you're not doing something to affect that outcome or change that outcome, aside from just resetting the board, it doesn't matter. Now we look at Vietnam and the Pentagon Papers, right? Leaked documents revealed dozens of internal analysis predicting the failure, yet commanders reported steady progress, and political leaders knew the war was unwinnable but hid the truth, something that down the road would become a pretty big deal, as it turns out, to the fact that, oh, wow, like, they actually lied about the fact that we were doing good. And we saw the same type of situation in the Middle East with Iraq and Afghanistan. Selective truth overall tends to kill. And it tends to kill all the people that we send into the meat grinder to some degree, one way or another. And there's no accountability here, right? When I say all the people, not all of the people, but I think you get my point. When we look at the Soviets in Afghanistan, generals, they lied upward. Success is imminent, something we heard also with our campaigns in Iraq and Afghanistan. Oh, it'll be over before we know it. It'll just be a quick fight. Our own generals, our own government even said that. we're stabilizing, we've crippled the enemy, right? How many times have we heard that here in our own country from our own, quote unquote, generals in our defense department of like, oh, success is inevitable. We saw this in Vietnam. We saw this in the Middle East. We saw this in a lot of different places. And we've seen it even in things as it pertains to South America and more, right? This idea of this perpetual lying has gotten us nothing more than just dead boys and girls, who are sent out to war, sent out to fight over a lie of capabilities and a lie of the reality of the situation, both on the ground, but ignoring the information that you're getting to make a good calculated decision. Overall, reality collapses, casualties, or reality is you have collapse, you have casualties, you have humiliation, as the Soviets found out in Afghanistan. And when the truth finally emerged, the regime eventually fell. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why the Soviet Union fell, but needless to say that Afghanistan really kind of was a linchpin as it pertains to that situation too. When we look at France and Algeria and Indochina, for instance, generals falsified metrics, politicians believed their own propaganda, as we very much see in the current Ukraine and Russia fight right now. You have people in the United States that they've gotten so involved in their own propaganda that they're just like, oh, there's no way that they can lose. Well, within the last week or so, you're having people that have finally, some people that are finally waking up and they're like, oh, like this is an absolute utter failure. There's no way that Ukraine can win. Well, anybody that was paying attention since the very beginning of the large operation that occurred or started in 2022 could have potentially told you that based off of the patterns, yeah, that was likely the outcome. And now you have, so many dead Ukrainians, and we funded Ukraine into this absolute crap show of a situation. And none of this, mind you, potentially could have ever taken place or would have ever taken place if we hadn't been part of the coup in 2014. So again, they lie about that. It's just lie after lie after lie after lie. The Nord Stream thing is still a lie, or it's being covered up. And there's small little bits of like admission here and there, but it's never the full truth. Again, it all goes upwards and then it comes downwards, and you have this convincing of capability and all of this, and it's just a mess, right? Entire wars were lost because the reality was treated like an inconvenience. This is still talking on France. And the pattern is universal. Empires die when their elites stop telling the truth, right? The death of truth, whether it is Vietnam, whether it is Korea, whether it is the Middle East, whether it is in South America, Central America, Ukraine, whether it is in Indochina or Algeria for the French, for instance. Look, it is one of those things where when you ignore the truth, it doesn't mean that the truth goes away. It simply just will come back much harsher and much harder down the road. So moving forward, what the founders would say. Well, let's take a look at what the founders thought. And we'll kind of attach a somewhat philosophical anchor. So Washington's warning to be prepared for war is one of the most effectual means of preserving peace, right? Like, so when we look at the way that Washington saw foreign policy, it was no entangling alliances. It was purely defensive doctrine, unless, of course, that there was a minor detail to where we could repel and then, measure in kind in that repulsion. But for the most part, it was very, very linear. It was very purposeful. It was very watched over in terms of our foreign policy, right? But look, I mean, you have to be capable of defending yourself. That's without a doubt. Preparation requires honestly acknowledging weaknesses, learning from failure, and humility in planning. If we have no humility, if we can't be honest, if we can't see what our faults and our weaknesses is, we're never going to be able to put forth an effectual defense. Lying turns preparation into theater overall. Madison, talks about a popular government without popular information, right? or the means of acquiring it. It is a prologue to a farce or a tragedy, right? The expansion on this, if you will, is when generals lie to civilians, the republic becomes a farce. It becomes a shell. It becomes anything but what it is intended to be, or what it claims it to be. When politicians act on those lies, the republic becomes a tragedy. We've seen this again, time and time and time and again. History shows us this. Overall, when you have this farce, this lie, this facade, and it calculates into tragedy, that calculation overall becomes very costly, not only in an economic sense, a resources and supply sense, a logistics sense, but also in the brothers, fathers, husbands, sisters, mothers, daughters that all die because of these lies that compound time and time and again. And people are joining the military with this idea that we are superior. And then when they believe that lie that's put down there, and you can't even be honest about a simulation, a war game, a test, or anything like that, that these people are supposed to use this information that they use to, bolster their ability to fight, when all of that is a lie, then what is it that you're trying to sell these people, right? What is it you're sending them to war for? Again, it's a long list of lies, and it doesn't end simply because you want to wave it under the rug, or simply because it's inconvenient to you. The truth exists always. It doesn't go away. Jefferson brought up a point here. Honesty is the first chapter in the book of wisdom, right? And there's a few quotes also that I would highly suggest that if you're not familiar with Valery Legasov, who was one of the main scientists that oversaw the Chernobyl disaster, he has quite a few intriguing quotes as well about the truth and lies and stuff like that. And I think all of them are very timely for this topic. A military that cannot be honest is incapable of wisdom or victory. If we eschew honesty, if we throw away the truth, if we can't analyze with an open and rational mind, then we're not going to have a victory in any sense of the word. Hamilton, the instruments of defense are the best instruments of tyranny. Again, this is something that's also been very much repetitiously talked about as time goes on. Eventually, the instruments that we use for war abroad will eventually becoming back home and turned against the people themselves. And when you compile that with lies, you see the type of situation that we get. If defense is built on illusion, tyranny follows, because the citizens must be controlled to maintain the lie, right? So there has to be a sense of control in order to affirm or maintain this lie. The consequences that we'll see in moving forward: soldiers die because leaders lied. This is an irrefutable fact. When training fails to reveal weaknesses, reality reveals them instead, at the cost of blood and manpower. Young Americans pay the price for a general's pride, for government pride, for these people who will throw they'll throw all of these results, all of these test results, the results of war games and force on force, and all of these things that we've been talking about. When you throw that under the rug, who pays the price? Well, I guarantee you it's not going to be the general. It's not going to be, unless, of course, he is the guy they selected to take the fall. And it's not going to be the politician. It's not going to be the Lindsey Grahams. It's not going to be the Blumenthals. It's not going to be all these other people. It's going to be your son or daughter, your husband or wife, your brother and sister, who ends up dying with their lives because of the lies that are conjured up by these high-ranking officials in the military and within the government. This is what you get. It is tit for tat. Now, if we look at another portion of this, the U.S. enters wars it cannot win. False confidence, which we have had for a very long time. It leads to strategic blunders, misread adversaries, which we are doing horribly both right now, overextension, and ultimately disaster. We are going down the road of disaster, from Ukraine, for Venezuela, for so many other places. Hey, Mehdi, thank you for showing up. Absolutely. We see this all over the place. The Middle East is no exception to this rule. Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, so many other places, each built on many, many illusions. endless funding of black holes, right? Weapons that fail in testing, when on paper, get mass produced, right? What we also see is taxpayers fund a fantasy. They fund this facade. They fund this idea of exceptionalism that doesn't exist. Soft authoritarianism, which I would even argue can translate into hard authoritarianism, right? When truth is suppressed internally, it must eventually be suppressed publicly. You cannot talk about this. You cannot bring this conversation up to, and they'll use everything in the book. You're un-American. You're not patriotic. You hate your country. You're not for your people. And the common one today, especially when you go against the grain, is, oh, well, you're not America first. Well, I'm here to tell you, I'm probably more America first than a majority of the people in Congress. And I'm probably more America first, and I'll toot my own horn here a little bit, than Donald Trump ever will be, or Rubio, or Besant, or any of these charlatans that sit there and talk about American principles, talk about American ideals, but then not only fall short, but throw them all to the wayside in general. And this is no exception whatsoever. And I'm not saying that any one person is solely responsible for these blunders and these failures, but it definitely goes upward and it definitely goes downward. And there's some culpability that exists with everybody, even the people themselves. Beyond soft authoritarianism, militarism always requires censorship. Empire always demands propaganda. That's the final note when it comes to soft authoritarianism. And when we look at the collapse of public trust, as this is all coming to fruition here, once people know the military lies, everything becomes suspect, right? Trust, once broken, never fully returns. And we're starting to see this fracture more and more and more, little by little, every single day. And I think it's a very, very important time in our life right now that we start to drive this forward, but do it with purpose and prudence and trepidation, so we do this properly, right? We have to bring truth back. We have to bring honesty back. We have to be able to be honest about these situations. So why this threatens the republic, why this threatens liberty even, right? A republic demands accountability. Accountability demands the truth. And if the military hides reality, right, Congress cannot govern, the people cannot judge, and the nation drifts into an imperial darkness, right? You have lie after lie after lie that just compounds until it obscures and tries to hide the truth, even though the truth is always there. And when that truth does come back up to the surface, it will decimate anything that is in its way. Without discrimination, without any conscience, the truth always wins. Empires lie to protect power. Republics tell the truth to protect liberty. Today, America is acting overwhelmingly like an empire. So what is it that we can take away from some of this? Well, that's where we come into our wrap up. A nation that lies to itself cannot survive. A military that refuses to learn is a military doomed to fail, right? Something that I feel has been going on for quite some time. And government built on the illusions, will eventually turn its power inward to control its own people, as is what happens to any empire, whether it's Rome, whether it's Greece, whether it's any place, right? You see these government apparatuses that eventually turn towards their own people to try and cull this proliferation of information, and it never ends up well because the truth becomes the enemy, right? The founders warned us, liberty cannot coexist with secrecy, deception, and unchecked militarism. This is something they overwhelmingly opposed. As sentinels of liberty, right, each and every single one of you, our duty is not to blindly cheer the illusions of strength. Matter of fact, we should push back against it, to demand the sober truth that is needed to preserve the republic, not only for our generation, but for future generations and our posterity. The final portion that I want to say is failure is a teacher. And if we ignore the teacher, if we don't recognize failure and what it can do for us, then we're doomed. But only if we are, only do we succeed if we're brave enough to face it. So that is my diatribe, that I guess is my video in episode tonight, as it pertains to the dangers of defense delusion, the horrible situation that we have put ourselves into, and ultimately what it means for the future if it goes uncorrected. We are in a very dangerous time for a myriad of different reasons. And I am not here to belittle one reason over the other, but I'm trying to bring some light and shine a microscope over this situation that's becoming more and more imperiling as time goes on, something that's been around for a very long time. So I hope you were able to get something out of this episode. I hope it was able to expand or open your eyes to a lot of the things that we have going on. And hopefully we will be able to move forward in a good concerted effort to hopefully change and or alter the outcome of this situation. With that being said, I greatly appreciate each and every one of you coming in. And I truly hope that the future is a little bit more bright. And I always have a little bit of hope. So take care. Thank you for joining me this evening. Thank you so much for tuning into the Sentinels of Liberty podcast. I am your host, Redbeard, and we will see you next Saturday for another fantastic episode. And without further ado, I will leave you with a little bit of outro music.
Steel-clad fist, rise in the dark. Shatter chains, ignite the spark. Tyrants crumble, feel the flame. Settle, strike, and free.